966.
This is the 966, episode 65. Richard Wilson, hello.
How are Lucien, you? Hello. 65. False start. Nobody knows this was a false start, but we're back.
This is a false start, but this is our official first start, and no one's going to hear the false start, which is great. Best thing about doing a podcast. Richard, we've got a really terrific episode this week. Back to the full program today, and in just a few moments, we'll be joined by one of the best guests and best conversations we've had, His Highness Prince Waleed bin Nasser Al-Saud, who is CEO of Mukatafa, a fast-growing Saudi-based consultancy that brings together public and private sector stakeholders to team up and make Vision 2030 a success. Really great conversation with Prince Waleed. We will be talking a little bit about the U.S. Saudi relationship here in a few moments as well, and some on the mining and minerals sector in the kingdom. Before we get going, please subscribe to us wherever you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube. Richard, what do you think? Let's get going.
Let's get going. You guys are gonna love this talk with Prince Waleed. Mm-hmm. Really, someone who's carved out a space, in Saudi business world and public and private sector that simply didn't exist, 5 years ago. So I learned a lot in this one. Anyway, my one big thing, we were talking about the solution. It's a little bit of a mashup, so bear with me, please. But the starting point has to be that since its launch a year ago, the 966 has repeatedly stated that the U.S. Saudi relationship urgently needs updating and reimagining in order to better reflect the changed and changing global and domestic priorities of Saudi Arabia. How many times have we said updated or reactive or outdated?
At least 65, one per episode.
And I feel like, maybe inaccurately, but I feel like we've been on this island largely alone for some time. So anyway, interestingly enough, it seems like the island has a few more people since the October 5th OPEC Plus decision to cut oil production quotas by 2 million barrels per day. As we know, there was a tremendous blowback from American interest, particularly members of Congress, many in the media, some in, a bit from the Biden administration. And then came a trickle of commentary from the policy community here that actually took a closer look at why Saudi Arabia would take this action and then support it by OPEC Plus. And some of these were pretty good. Some of these were thoughtful contributions. A lot of the reactions post October 5th were, bombastic and really not connected in reality and sort of angered, but there are some good ones. And I want to share a couple. I'm going to share a quote each from two of them. And the first is in an article in Foreign Affairs entitled "How Saudi Arabia Sees the World" by Karen Young. Karen Young does a lot of good analysis on the kingdom. Quote, MBS doesn't envision his country as a second-tier player in a bifurcated international system akin to the one that existed during the Cold War. He sees the emerging geopolitical order as malleable, made up of a set of interlocking parts, and he believes Riyadh has the right to work with a shifting constellation of partners to move markets and shape political outcomes. He believes that Saudi Arabia will have to vigorously protect its own economy as the world's energy and oil demands fluctuate. But if that succeeds, no one can stop it from carving an independent path and pioneering a different kind of economic development. In Riyadh's view, the future belongs to emerging markets, which account for 49% of overall global GDP, unquote. So the second quote that I'm sharing, writing for the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, Kristen Dewan Smith notes that, quote, underlying the new Saudi foreign policy direction is this new Saudi nationalism. This derives from many sources: the shift from Islamic legitimacy to a nationalist appeal, the need to popularly engage and employ a young Saudi population, and the ambition of the young Saudi leader. The quote, Saudi first approach is unmistakable in op-eds and on social media, and it colors Saudi policies such as the OPEC Plus production cut decision. Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz drew sustained applause at the Future Investment Initiative by dismissing the United States expectation of support with the sharp retort, quote, I keep listening. Are you with us or against us? And he asked, is there any room for, quote, "We are for Saudi Arabia and for the people of Saudi Arabia," unquote. And as she notes, it drew sustained applause. And finally, I want to look back at, I think it's worthwhile to look at what Princess Rima bint Bandar Al-Saud, the top Saudi diplomat to the United States, has she's practically been pleading with the U.S. leadership and American media to update its perceptions of the kingdom and to imagine an entirely different, less narrowly defined partnership. In a June, this is last June, so what is that? 5 months ago, article for Politico this year, she wrote, quote, "Long gone are the days when the U.S. Saudi relationship could be defined by the outdated and reductionist, quote, oil for security paradigm. The world has changed and existential dangers facing us all, including food and energy security and climate change, cannot be resolved without an effective U.S. Saudi alliance. The Saudi Arabia of today is barely recognizable from how it once looked, even just 5 years ago. Today, we are not just a global leader in energy, but also in investment and sustainable development." And this is all from that Politico article. "We must offer the people of this region greater hope for the future, and that is why our reimagined partnership encompasses cooperation from emerging technologies to joint space exploration. Given Saudi Arabia's status as the cradle of Islam, the reverberations will be felt from Nigeria to Afghanistan." And finally, last quote. Thanks for bearing with me. In an October 25th interview with CNN, she's said, quote, "I hear a lot of people talk about reforming or reviewing the relationship with the kingdom, and I think actually that is a positive thing. We are a young population and we have a young leadership. We have an aspiration and a goal to engage with the world in a way we never did before. This kingdom is not the kingdom it was 5 years ago. It is not the kingdom it was 10 years ago. Every piece of analysis that existed is no longer relevant," unquote. So, Lucien, as I mentioned, a bit of a mashup. I will say, though, the OPEC Plus decision and the ensuing fallout has actually prompted some closer analysis of what might drive Saudi Arabia's current decision-making, both domestic and foreign. So anyway, and I really think it's important to sort of just stop and listen to what Princess Rima and others are saying. As she said in the CNN interview, this is from the horse's mouth. She's reflecting the opinions, the feelings, the approach of Saudi leadership.
Yeah, Richard, that's a really good one. It's really hard to sort of wrap our heads around the changing relationship, you and me, because we're so heavily involved in what's going on every single day with our newsletter, and this is what we do, and now what we talk about, and we're so into it. And so it's really hard to sort of think about the relationship outside of our little focus here. And it's not a little focus. It's just we're right in the middle of the sun, and there's a whole solar system around us. And part of the problem is that, in my opinion, I think Americans don't think about other countries unless they have to think about other countries. And for Saudi Arabia, a lot of times they're thinking about Saudi Arabia because of the topic du jour, which is not always favorable for Saudi Arabia. But anyway, Richard, to your point, Princess Rima, one of the most impressive public speakers I've ever seen in my life, and her poise is just so hard to match. We've seen her give speeches in person. We've listened to her hits in the media, every single one, recently on CNN, which pretty much went viral for everybody that I follow on social media. Everyone was just like, wow, this is really incredible and impressive, and resharing it. Richard, I got to hang out with her and have dinner about a week ago, actually with our forthcoming guest, Prince Waleed. Her EQ is just off the charts. So in every way, she's just obviously the right person for that very tough job. And I think more of Princess Rima in the US press, including ideally on this podcast very soon, will help the relationship. I just think that your point, though, overall is just really spot on. The relationship needs to experience a reset and an updating, and it doesn't have to be just purely on American terms. And, we set the tone and we set the syllabus, and Saudis just follow along. I think that's going to change. And if I were to give advice to Saudis, and I was just there for the FII, and the sort of the vibe on the ground was, there's this tussle between the G to G side of things, but the U.S. and Saudi Arabia will always be friends. I mean, I kept hearing that over and over. Yeah, well, we're going to get through this. I mean, there were 7,000, delegates and speakers, and mostly in the business community and the person to person level. So those people are not saying, well, because of this oil tussle, we're not going to go to FII. We're not going to continue doing business with Saudi Arabia. So there is a huge disconnect right now between the perception of the relationship in Washington and in these circles and what's really happening, how to bridge that. I just think that was a really good one, Richard. It was a really great point. And Princess Rima just is so impressive.
Well, it's an interesting sort of hinge right now in a lot of ways. The Russian invasion of the Ukraine has brought to the fore how we envision the rules-based international order, and we're sort of a feeling that there might be a transition point, because in essence it's really reinvigorated the traditional one, where that's the U.S. in partnership with its major allies, EU, is trying to reinforce or maintain a rules-based international order that is a bit bipolar, and this is how the people in the region, many people in the region see it. So setting up the U.S. versus China and Russia, particularly U.S. versus China, and Saudi Arabia at the same time, is going through this extraordinary internal process, is seeing itself as not a regional sort of power, but as a middle power, something that is significantly greater and should and carries significantly more weight. And it doesn't want to be caught up in this, either you or us paradigm, which the U.S. is, if you listen and you look at the recent national security strategy, where, the Biden administration basically laid out, said, we're going to make a distinction between democracies and non-democracies. Saudi Arabia knows where it falls in that distinction, and it doesn't want to be trapped. It doesn't want to have to make a choice, and largely it doesn't want to have to do these things for domestic reasons. I mean, it doesn't want to. The U.S. has a particular perception of what needs to be done with Russia in defense of Ukraine, but that doesn't necessarily benefit Saudi Arabia economically, and what it sees as its priority goals in terms of its transition. So anyway, a lot of things are coming together at the same time. I think people are trying to unwrap it, and as I said, the October 5th event, because it got everybody so hot and bothered, I think has created and stimulated a bit of a closer look at why Saudi Arabia has done what it's done, and how it sees itself.
My one big thing, there's been a good amount of activity in Saudi Arabia's mining and industry sectors of late. A few headlines generated by the kingdom's mining and industry minister, Bandar AlKhorayef. The minister and his team recently visited Australia for a big event there, the International Mining and Resources Conference, IMARC. Of course, his delegation there comes days after he launched the National Industrialization Strategy at CAPSARC earlier this month, an event I attended actually at the invitation of the deputy minister there, which really highlighted the ambition from the minister. It sort of had the feeling of like an Apple launch event. It was a really big deal. And the deputy minister, Osama Zamil, both of them gave keynote addresses about what they're doing there. And clearly they're working really long hours in overdrive at the ministry. So back to Australia. First, Saudi Arabia is maybe considering setting up a new metals and mining stock exchange index, which is very interesting. The minister told Reuters in an interview in Sydney that his team met with Australian counterparts to learn more about a mining index similar to what Australia has, which lists metals and mining firms and producers of gold, steel, and precious metals. So AlKhorayef said, we're looking at it. He said, quote, it's something we are studying. We have not made up our mind. We do have NOMU. That's the secondary listing to Tadawul. So we'll take a look at it. Under consideration for now. More broadly in the sector, Richard, AlKhorayef said Saudi Arabia plans to award over a dozen mining exploration licenses to international investors in the coming year. 5 new exploration sites are up for licensing, and the kingdom will release details of an additional 10 opportunities next year. This was in a speech, actually, the minister said at IMARC. More than 145 licenses have been issued so far, and the country has seen a 27% year-on-year growth in mining revenue, which is impressive. The minister also also referenced the recently announced ambitious strategy to attract investments worth $32 billion into the sector. Of course, we've talked about this a lot, Richard, on the 966. There was the recent auction of a potentially lucrative contract for the Kanagia mining site, my favorite word to pronounce now. And in another interview, Richard, I shared this with you right before the show, with im-mining.com. Really good interview with the minister. And I'll put this in the comments in the show notes on YouTube and on the podcast platform. AlKhorayef described what is different about the kingdom's mining and minerals approach over the last 2 years versus before. He said really three things. First, the new Saudi mining investment law, which came into force January 2021, sort of reset everything to better encourage and facilitate mining investment. Second was the Saudi Geological Survey. He said, especially improving the detail, quality, and availability of mineral exploration information. And third, he said, was manpower and human resources. Quote, how we can link a growing minerals sector with our industries. These three things, he said, have formed a sequence of events that together are making for a full picture. He also talks in this interview about the importance of mining tech incentives, the importance of developing skilled workers. Really kind of an amazing interview, just really good. So I'll make sure I include that. Richard, mining also ties in very closely with another one of the most important industries in the coming few decades globally, and that's batteries, especially for energy storage and for EVs. Of course, there was the announcement this week that Saudi Arabia would launch a new EV in a JV with Foxconn called Seer. I think I'm saying that right, CEER, Seer. Also in that announcement was Saudi Arabia saying it will be making a stronger push into mining and will continue ahead with plans for an electric vehicle battery metals plant, which is interesting. This could sort of be the next gold rush for the world in the years to come. Richard, you shared this week, I think it was Monday, the S&P Global Mobility special report called A Reckoning for EV Battery Raw Materials. The first line of this is, quote, geopolitical turbulence and the fragile and volatile nature of critical raw material supply chain could curtail planned expansion in battery production, slowing mainstream electric vehicle adoption and the transition to an electrified future. So really just putting all this together, the minister and his team, Minister AlKhorayef, Deputy Minister for Mining Affairs Khalid Al-Mudaifer, Deputy Minister Osama Zamil, these guys are full steam ahead, and they're sort of finding the sweet spot for Saudi Arabia, which is really leaning into mining and developing this industry as a way to diversify. Just shows how important these sectors are to the kingdom. And looking ahead a little bit, Richard, the ministry, and I'll wrap up with this, recently announced that the second edition of the Future Minerals Forum will take place in January of 2023, so in about 2 months, actually 2 months from today. And if the launch of the National Industrialization Strategy at CAPSARC, which I attended, was any indication, one can bet this will be a pretty big event. Lots going on in the space. We've covered a lot of it on the 966. I thought it'd be kind of good to use the opportunity to get a little updated on it, but they're full steam ahead over there.
Yeah, that's a good one. And it's always a good one to do minerals and mining, especially there's a couple things. So just to riff off of what you said, that S&P report, mobility report, was I pulled that for our quotable on Tuesday, I think. And the quoted was, and for those who you don't know, the Sustug Review comes out daily. It has any number, probably 20 to 25 cited articles about Saudi Arabia in the region, and it's broken up with a feature, P1, and then a quoted, and then 3 what we call CSs. But anyway, those are storylines we think are important, and then you have the body of the newsletter. But the quoted for that day was, quote, the battery will be the defining technological and supply chain battleground for the industry in the next decade, and access to their constituent raw materials will be crucial, unquote. That's from that S&P mobility report. So just to reiterate what you were talking about, but the mining industry in Saudi is interesting because it's, going way back when, you always heard third pillar, mining industry, a third pillar. And what does that mean, third pillar in the industry? That means, oil and petrochemical are 2 pillars. They want to make mining a third pillar. You referenced that 32 billion that was in investments, not that they're spending, but they want to attract 32 billion investments, was announced in May. And the nice thing about the mineral sector in Saudi Arabia is it's already making money. And it really right now it's a matter of obviously expanding it, getting more, growing it, but it's already a quite a lucrative sector. I mean, in 2022, expected revenue was just under 300 billion. What's notable about that is in 2016, when Vision 2030 was announced, it was 180 billion. So it had gone down a little bit. So it fluctuates, but it's on the upswing. It's projected to grow 10% a year, annual growth rate of 10% a year between 2022 and 2025. So it's on a nice trajectory. They're really expanding it, aggressively moving forward. And they've got in January upcoming the second Future Minerals Forum, which they did. The first one this year was quite successful. It had rolled out, as you mentioned, new mining law earlier in the year. Really going hard at this industry, and it does marry up with, we're going to have a Yallah. One of the Yallah items will be on SEER, and that Foxconn tie-up. But this does have the potential to really tie in nicely with a really budding EV ecosystem, manufacturing ecosystem between Lucid and Foxconn in Saudi Arabia. So you see a lot of things coming together, but just the long and the short of it, the mining industry is generating a lot of revenue for Saudi Arabia, and it will continue to do so.
Yeah, great points. I really like the name Arabian Shield. I really think that sounds really cool.
Sounds.
Yeah, this is this is the reason why all great points. The reason why I chose this is just because there's so much going on, and it seems like it's all tied together in a way. And EVs, and I don't want to step on our forthcoming Yallah, EVs really sounds like it might be sort of where it will be, like sort of the nucleus of that. So.
Well, I mean, that SEER thing was almost my one big thing. It may yet be my one big thing because it's really a cool, it's a coup. It's a really neat thing. So, but I definitely, that was a good topic for our one big thing. Cause it's always, like I said, it's a strength of the strength in the minerals and mining right now with Saudi Arabia. It seems to be under good leadership, really ambitious leadership. And, the trajectory is up.
Mm-hmm. Richard, what do you think? Let's get to our conversation with Prince Waleed. Joining us now on the 966, a very special guest, His Highness Prince Waleed bin Nasser Al-Saud. Prince Waleed is CEO of Mukatafa, a consultancy based in Riyadh that brings together the public and private sectors in Saudi Arabia, forming an ecosystem that enables the private, public, and third-party sectors to collaborate, integrate, and grow together as the kingdom drives forward with Vision 2030. Prince Waleed, hello. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm very excited and glad that I'm talking to both of you.
Well, Prince Waleed, we are delighted you're here, and every guest has a story of how they came to the 966. Sometimes they're just in our network friends, and we invite them, and they say yes. Other times it's a long pursuit, like this one. You and your team came to the U.S. in July, and I was not aware of Mukatafa. And I looked at it and I said, wow, this is fascinating stuff. This is really a sweet spot and an important area of need. Let's invite them. And so we started this process late in July. And I want to say your people are excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And a particular shout out to Al-Saud. And I also want to say for our listeners, our viewers, mukatafa.com, the website is first rate. Mm-hmm. It really is. It does give you a real insight on what they do. And I'd like to do two things with you, if I may, Prince Waleed. Are you calling in from Dubai?
Correct.
Exactly. So you are in Dubai now for Gulf Host, which is a very big event. This is November 8th to 10th. Gulf Host is MENA's largest hospitality and food service exhibition. 113,000 visitors from 182 countries. Correct. And what's interesting is COOT, do I pronounce that properly?
Yes.
COOT is one of the associations that Mukatafa has stood up and runs. is partnering with Gulf Host as the official strategic partner to present a full day of sessions and workshops, which is something you did yesterday, right?
Correct.
The lineup looked amazing. All the issues and topics that you addressed, really impressive. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to go back to the beginning and say, and have you tell us, you are founder and not only CEO, but founder of Mukatafa, why you thought it was needed, how you went about getting it stood up and started. And then let's come back to this COOT association in this event in Dubai as sort of a case study of what Mukatafa does and is doing really well. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Then let me start before even creating Mukatafa. In 2008, I joined McDonald's Saudi Arabia. They were going through a transformation. They restructured their business, and I was asked to join for a year, actually, just to go through the transformation, just to do the systems and so on. They believe I'm good at, governance, HR, structuring, and so on. And I, loved the concepts, and I wanted to join an international organization to learn from, the experience. A year after we joined, McDonald's globally started what they call a bold plan. It started in China, then they took the experience or the practice to the world. We were in Orlando. Usually they have their annual convention. And we talked about doing the same, doubling the number of stores in Saudi Arabia. At that time, it took the company 15 years to build 75 stores. And we decided in 3 years to double that number, so 25 every year. And we said, let's do the due diligence, ensure that everything is possible. We checked the suppliers, we checked all, the different needed element to double in 3 years. And we came back with 2 issues. One issue is employment. So doubling the number of people in 3 years, how we can maintain the culture, how we maintain the skills, the quality of people. The other one is how to expedite the regulations to get permits and so on. At that time, employing Saudis with that large number was a challenge. The second thing was to open a store in Saudi Arabia takes you not less than 8 months if everything is, working perfectly, to have your business up and running. 8 months is just too long for opening 25 stores in 1 year. And if we want to build 75, that would be a big challenge. So I was assigned the 2 files, the HR and the government procedures. And I started working with the government. At that time, there was no taxes, so the government has no interest in growing the private sector. And everything, the economy was driven by the government. So it took us a while to go around and convince the government why they should support us to expand. That will bring jobs, will bring local content, will improve the economy, this and that. And things moved in the right direction. And we were able to do that. Things that used to take 8 months start to take, 2 weeks or 3 maximum. And we were able to achieve the plan. After we finished the bold plan, there was nothing, challenging, I would say, to do. So I stepped out. At that time, after I stepped out, it was about the introduction of the Vision 2030. And by the way, I joined McDonald's to stay 1 year. I stayed 9 years. So I love the place. Then when I left McDonald's, it was just the first year of the Vision 2030. And after, I would say, 6 months of the launch of the vision, many of the friends in the industry, CEOs, leaders, and so on, owner of businesses, came to me, and they said, we're facing a lot of issues that are impacting negatively our industry, the food and beverages. And we would, since now you're independent, you don't represent a brand, we would, as an industry, come together, and we would like you to organize us and represent the industry to align the industry with Vision 2030. And I told the members at that time that I've never done such thing, and it's not, something I know. They said, try it and do it for 6 months, and then leave it to us. And I said, okay, I'll do it for 6 months, but no more. I said, okay, we started. What happened is that we hired a research company, collected data about the industry, how big it is. And this is something we, until today, we lack, which is good quality data about the businesses. So what we've done, collected how many people we employ, how many females, how much we spend on training, how much we spend on the economy, all of that. Then we start, going around and advocating for the industry, why it should be included in the Vision 2030. Before we did that, actually, there were ministers saying, if we close down 50% of the F&B in Saudi, there's no impact because they don't really contribute to the economy. It was to that level. So we went around, we talked to many officials in Saudi, till we reached the Minister of Economy, His Excellency Mohammed Tuwajri, and we presented to him all about the information we have. He used to be the head of the National Transformation Program. So he said this in English. He said, this is a national hidden treasure we did not know about. He said, you ticked all Vision 2030 boxes. He said, I'll give you 4 things. I'll make you visible in Vision 2030. I'll work with you on creating new regulations or updating existing one, and we'll work on economical stimulus for the industry. He said, in return, what are you going to give us? I told him, Your Excellency, give us a month, and we'll come back to you with a plan, and we did. We said we will employ, as an industry collectively, 50,000 Saudi, male and female. We will train 70,000. We will spend this much figure. I don't recall it right now. We will develop an academy specialized on hospitality. We will do a recruitment program. And we gave him, different initiatives that we will do. And we signed on that. And thanks to the member of the industry, we overachieved all the objectives. During that time, the head of the manufacturing committee in the Chamber of Commerce was going around and advocating for the industry, the manufacturing industry. And the minister told him, the Minister of Economy, this is exactly what he told him. He said, "You, the manufacturers, are like zombies. Every one of you is walking, alone. You're not walking collectively. Go and do what Qut is doing." And he said, "Who's Qut?" He said, "The food and beverage industry. This is what they've done, this and that." So he came to me. I did not know him before that, and he said, I met the ministry, and we'd like you to do what you did to Qut. And I said, I did this only for Qut, out of friendship to the team, my friends and so on. So he said, we are, in a desperate situation. Manufacturing is something strategic for the country. I said, okay, I'll work with you for 3 months, then you take over. He said, okay. We worked with the manufacturers for less than a month. And then the word went all the way to the Crown Prince that the manufacturers are coming together to advocate for their issues and so on. So he called us in. We met the Crown Prince. We were about 12 people. My role at that time was to organize the priorities. We don't want to go with a shopping list. What are the things that if we fix will have the highest impact on the industry in terms of GDP, in terms of employment, all the key element that the vision is looking for. And we went with 12 requests, and we met him alone. There was no ministers, no one. He went through all the cards. We did cards. What are the issues? The short description. What's the impact? And what's the solution? And this is something we adapted till today. We never go with a problem. We go with a problem and a recommended solution. Then what happened is one of the members, which is Bandar AlKhorayef, became the Minister of Manufacturing, and Osama Zamil, who was leading the group, who contacted me, became now the Vice Minister of Manufacturing. So what happened is that the ministry was split. It used to be the Ministry of Manufacturing and the Energy. It was, separated, became its own ministry. We requested so many things. The Crown Prince approved it. Some right away, some took a couple of weeks, some took almost a year before they approved it. What happened then is we stopped, organizing the industry. Both of, two of the members became the ministry and the minister and vice minister, and a third one became a deputy as well. So I said, I'm done. It's only Qut that I'll hand over. What happened is the Minister of Economy at that time said, we have the Umrah industry, which is, the visiting Mecca and Medina, and they want to reach 30 million visitors at that time. And I would like you to look into how we can organize them. It's a national interest. So I said, okay, I'll go and see the leaders and talk to them. When I was in Jeddah at that time, one of the leaders said, the grocery industry are facing a lot of issues. And I told them about what you do, and they would like to meet you. I said, okay. I met Bin Dawood, which is one of the biggest supermarkets chains in Saudi. It's a listed company. And they said, this is our situation. We want to come together. And, we would like you to start advocating. And then I realized at that time that this is, becoming what I do.
A pattern.
Now I have, yes, I have Qut working with them. I have worked with the manufacturers, Umrah, the grocery. And I saw the value, and I saw that the gap that is existing between the government and its vision, and how they are aligned on achieving that vision, and how fragmented the private sector, and because of historical reasons, very fragmented. Like the minister said, they're zombies. They don't work together. We don't have, trade association. We don't have unions, all of that. So they never work together. So what happened is, I said, the vision 2030 is the vision of all of us. It's not the vision of, the Crown Prince. And we said, let's come together and, become specialized at bringing the two parties together. So we said, let's create Mukatafa, which is standing shoulder to shoulder. And what we work is to build the Mukatafa between the two parties. Then we started, the fashion industry, jewelry, beauty, electronics, home appliances, I hope I don't forget any. Now we have the ride hailing, the Uber, the Careem, and so on, the home delivery, food home delivery as well. All are coming together. Now, after the national industrial strategy is launched, we're working on the manufacturing industry. We have 8 sectors that we're gonna organize. So basically, to give you the methodology that we've developed, what we do actually is we go and we talk to the leaders, the private sector leaders, one by one, and we try to convince them why they need to come together, why it's in their benefit to sit across the table from their main competitor and find a common ground. What are the issues that are either impacting the growth of the industry, the cost of doing business, or the ease of doing business? Coming together, having one voice, one priority, that will help us to really work with the government, and they really listen. When we come together, they truly listen. And we achieved so many things during the years just by doing so. After we do that, we bring them together. We've developed a methodology that Al-Hanouf is leading, how to identify the issues the industry is facing, and we have a methodology for that as well. Then we align with the government on their priority. Then we develop initiatives, how to solve such issues. Lately, before I talk about international investor, we worked with many ministries on creating new policies or updating old policies. And we continue to do that. We monitor and we update. We're sitting today because of the level of impact that the trade association brings, which is far exceeds the only channel today that exists, which is the Chamber of Commerce. We sit in so many committees, so many partnerships. Everything we do, we support with research. So everything we say is supported with numbers, facts, and so on. When we develop recommendation, we ensure that we look at the world, what's happening, how did they solve it, and we develop that, bring that to the private sector for them to decide what's the best solution for the issue. We never develop a solution. They do that. We only help them with the information that we bring, and then we capture such solution. After we do that, then we advocate with the public sector. And we find most of the time, we find a common ground. The government wants something, the private wants something else, and we are an independent party, so we can talk to both of them about what can be done now, next year, the year after, so on and so forth. Only lately that we started working with international investors or international companies that wanted to come to Saudi Arabia. What we're doing actually is 4 things. We're providing information about the industry that they're interested in looking at. When they come to Saudi, we manage the networking, that the meetings they need to have, and we ensure that they meet the right people, not to waste their time, going to different ministries or different official. We take them exactly to who they should meet. Then whatever is agreed on with the minister or the deputy and so on, we ensure that we follow up to ensure what was agreed on is being actioned. The third thing we do is if they're looking for partners in Saudi Arabia, we know the local businesses and we can recommend who are the known businesses or the specialized businesses that they should be talking to, and we link them together. Lastly, is if they need an investor to come in and invest, and we know the funds that are available, we know the banks that are interested in certain industry, and we link them together. So basically, this is what we do in Mukatafa in a very short description.
And that was outstanding and really informative and fascinating because I had it completely upside down. And I say that because when you get into Mukatafa and you look at it, you go, oh, they created Mukatafa, and then these associations, ensued. And in fact, it's just the reverse. You remind me. So right now, you have Koot, which is restaurants and cafes. Sanaa, which is manufacturers, correct?
Exactly.
Moan,
Exactly.
grocers.
That's a grocery. Exactly.
Akilat, is that, and that's vendors.
Exactly.
And then ZY, which is fashion, jewelry, and beauty. And by the way, that's a pretty cool logo for that ZY.
Thank you.
I will say this, Prince Waleed, and you remind me of one of my early bosses who was a terrible boss. But one of the best things he said to me, he said, "Look, Richard, if you ever want something done, don't ask somebody who's not busy. Ask somebody who's busy because clearly they're busy for a reason."
Okay.
And I can see this is what's happened to you.
Yeah.
You had your success with Koot, obviously, and your McDonald's
Correct.
success, and people started looking at you and say, "Hey, this guy's getting stuff done. We need to ask him to do something."
Exactly.
But let me a bigger picture and something maybe you speak to. This is a little theoretical. I find it fascinating that trade associations are a thing in Saudi Arabia, and they weren't previously. And is it correct to say so? In 15 years ago, if you were a manufacturer or you had a number of restaurants, the way to do business was to essentially get a patron in the key ministry. Find
True.
somebody who can help you out and maybe give you an inside route here or advice there. But it's a very one-way, point-to-point thing. It has nothing to do with the greater industry. It has nothing to do with the larger purpose of creating jobs, employment, training, this sort of thing. And would you say, so I'm fascinated that trade associations now not only exist in Saudi Arabia, but are critical to moving sectors ahead.
Absolutely. See, you're absolutely right. On the past, and when I say in the past, before 2016, so it's only recently, to get insights of what the government is trying to do or their strategy, or you want to update a policy. It used to be only for the big companies that they have access to the government. After the division, transparency became, changed totally. Today, the information and the access that we have is passed through the associations to all the members, big, medium, and small. The information that we pass to the government is the issues that facing the small, medium, and large. So everybody now have that access. And through the association, even the small company, if they have an issue, they can easily raise it to the association. And there's a mechanism to ensure that it's a genuine issue. We back it with data and so on, and then advocate with the government. So things truly changed on that site.
And it's interesting as you pivot now with the national investment strategy, which is a continuation expansion, and we see one of the things I think Lucien and I are really interested in Mukatafa is when we look at 2030 and we're sort of down in the weeds on Vision 2030, we're always trying to assess implementation, because ultimately that's the thing that matters in terms of success. And Mukatafa is right there at the heart of this. And now we're looking as to expand the national investment strategy. So the things you provide for, and this is for anybody listening, for an international investor, they can come to. So let's say you're a large, grocery chain. I mean, they can come to Mukatafa and you can sort of take them by the hand and say, all right, this is who you should be talking to, and so on and so forth.
Let's talk about large and small. Okay, there could be someone with a innovation or something even small that they want to bring to Saudi. They see the right market is in Saudi. What we do, first of all, one of the four things we do is we provide information. So they said, what's happening in that industry? We provide them with that information. If they want to move to the second level, which is we want to meet partners, then we'll take them directly we'll give them a recommendation, link them with the right people. If they need investor, we do the same. Big company, which is usually is different, need. Because they're coming big, they would like to sit with the decision makers and understand where they are going with their strategy in terms of their businesses. Sometimes they are willing to come, but they need an exception here or there. And usually, and this is happening today, ministers are authorized to give exceptions to projects that will have an impact on the economy, either on employment, either on exports, so many things, and they will listen. So what we do is we first educate ourselves on who they are, what they want to achieve. Then before we get them to meet the official, we go and we meet them and we talk to them to ensure that they are the right people, they have the right information they need. They might ask some question before they meet them. So we do our homework before the company come to Saudi. Then we take them around, meet, we have the agenda, like I said, and then we have the minutes of meeting. All of that we do in Mukatafa. And all of this actually for two reasons. One, to ensure that when they meet, they already, both of them are briefed and they know what they're going to talk about. Two, is that whatever they agree on is executed. Most of the time is that when two leaders meet, they see eye to eye, they see the future, and they agree on something. When they leave the room, nothing happens.
Right.
Because it's been delegated to someone in the ministry or in the company to do what's needed, but it doesn't. So what we do, we ensure that we follow up and we update both leaders that you agreed on this is where we are today. This is an obstacle, this is how we solve it until, it's translate to the ground and we see it happening. And this is with everything we do. We ensure, one, is that the right people meet. Two, they are ready and understanding what are the issue. Both of them look at the solutions or the recommendation we're doing. Then both of them agree, and then we do our work. We follow up until it happens.
And you make a great distinction between a large company and an SME. I mean, many large companies have their own means to get SMEs. I mean, if you're in Tampa, where you went to school, you don't have the means to get over to Saudi and set up and do these rounds on your own. And you referenced it in the early days of COOT. One of the big things that people need is market research. Right. And they can't pay for that. And they wouldn't know how to get it if they could. Right. So it's fascinating. It seems so simple, but it is not. But I mean, it makes so much sense, and it's such a resource. And it's also interesting as Mukatafa, gets into different sectors, and you've already got sort of 5 specific associations, and I suspect you'll continue if the pattern continues and people keep asking you to help them out.
It's 8 today. What's on the net and the website is the real estate development is one.
All right.
The food delivery is another, and the ride hailing as well.
Nice.
And we have other on the pipeline that we're evaluating whether to get into or to postpone. So,
and the beauty of that is market research, market understanding. So you don't have to now create the wheel. In any of these sectors now, you have a fundamental understanding of the sector, and you can really help right out of the gate. Which brings me back. It's funny you said the food delivery, because you just signed, and is this unusual? Mukatafa just signed a relationship with Foodix, which is the largest in this area. Is this a standard practice?
See, when we create associations, in Mukatafa, we have two functions and two teams. One team, maybe this is a good, to give you a little bit of how we're structured in Mukatafa. We have one team that is the advocacy team. They focus fully on engaging the public sector. Their experts and their skills is on advocating, networking, being available in the ministries to follow up on whatever was agreed on with the leaders of the industry and the ministry. So that's one part. Under advocacy as well is research and policy, where we have specialized researchers and analysts. Their role is just to collect data and everything that we're looking at, and then develop policy, because both are so technical. So they work on developing policy and recommendation. The other function is what we call the NMO, which is growth. Mm-hmm. The NMO team, their job is to focus on engaging the private sector, ensuring that bringing them together, to communicating all the information we receive from the public sector on a timely manner, to be credible, reliable. We get their information right away to share it. The third thing is to manage the association. Part of managing the association goes down to two things: the governance, making sure that they follow all the bylaws, government regulations, and so on, how to run the association, because there's a board, there is general assembly, there are audit committee, and so on. So they need to manage that. The other thing that they need to do is generate revenues for the association, so it can fund itself and grow. So they do sponsorships, which is happening with Foodix. They do shows, that's why we're in Dubai working with the Dubai World Trade Center. The Gulf host, we are participating with them this year in Dubai. However, what we agreed on, which will happen in June of 2023, is the Saudi food show. That will become the biggest food show in the region. So it's all food manufacturing all the way to food retail. So that's the agreement now that's happened between Qut and Dubai World Trade Center.
Is the Saudi food show scheduled?
June 20. Yes, I'll get you the right date. June 20, I believe.
Yes, and in keeping with Saudi Arabia of late, it has to be the biggest.
Yes,
of course.
Biggest economy, and currently biggest economy in the region.
Exactly.
Without looking at what's happening now, things are changing in the ground in Saudi Arabia. Be it, let's talk about the obvious, the Giga project, which a lot of people really don't know about what's happening in the ground. We have at Diriyah, a huge project that first phase is already done. Red Sea, Q1, the first phase is done, so people will start going there. We have Neom. I'll give you just a figure to see how much of work is happening. Neom, on a daily basis, there are an average 3,500 mid and higher management people in Neom doing work. And this figure came because we were looking there was an opportunity to engage the hotel industry to open hotels in Neom. And that's a good number of people where you can have a good hotel, running in Neom. So there's a lot of activity. Diriyah is in Riyadh, so we see all of the activity that's happening, and so on and so forth. So these are the big projects that are happening. If we go down to a different level, what's changing in Saudi, as you know, the one of Vision 2030 objective was to bring females to the workplace and to achieve 30% by 2030. Last year, we achieved 35%.
Mm-hmm.
So that's changes happening quickly and impacting the economy, the purchasing power, all of that. 100 million tourist visitor that has been targeted to come to by 2030 with Al-Ula, the other places. So now we're talking a big economy in the region without all of this happening. If we add that to it, the numbers that we're targeting are achievable. So even if we talk about Vision 2030, Riyadh Vision 2030, that's a different story even, where Riyadh will become in 10 years. So different shows, different, companies should come and look seriously to come to Saudi.
One of the, and people refer to it as a sleeping giant, that is awakening in many ways. But one of the interesting things, as we've watched Vision 2030 and we very closely, so 2016, now we're 7 years into it, we're Saudi Arabia is well into it, but in so many phases, it's transitioning from conceptualization to implementation. You're seeing things that seemed improbable. I mean, when they first came out with 100 million visitors in whenever, and people would go, "This is Saudi Arabia? Are you kidding me?" Yeah. And now you see they're hitting the numbers. They're going to get the numbers, and you see how much it makes sense. We did a recent in a recent episode, we talked about the tourism industry and the aviation industry, and they talked about what a significant percentage of global GDP is, and they represent, and why a country like Saudi Arabia would go so hard after those. And then you see why you would do it. Then they say, well, we're going to do it, and now you see them doing it. Mm-hmm. And it's a fascinating, if you're watching the arc from the beginning, it's just fascinating to see how it goes, which is one reason why Mukatafa was so interesting to us. We know about NEOM, we know about Diriyah, and so far, as people know, I don't think most people know that Mukatafa is there and doing this kind of really substantial, effective and key work. So mm-hmm. This has been really interesting to have you help us understand what Mukatafa is doing.
Absolutely.
How big is your organization, Prince Waleed? How many employees work with you at Mukatafa?
Today we're 42, and we just finished our structure for 2023, and we will be around 70 by Q1.
Mumtaz.
And are you? Is it a public or a private organization?
Private.
Yeah.
So far, it's a partnership between me and the Director of Advocacy, Razan, and this is what actually we do in Mukatafa. If they, stay a certain number of years and they play a role, they become partners.
Mm-hmm. So specifically, the Director of Advocacy, is this within SEDA?
No, this is with Razan within, yeah.
She's the Senior Advocacy Director, a young Saudi female. That's having an impact on what Mukatafa is doing, and now she's a partner, and we have 2 in the pipeline that will become partners soon.
Fascinating. And again, I think that's why it's important to put an emphasis on founder and that founder and CEO title, mm-hmm. because you clearly identified an inefficiency and went and filled it. Oh. And it's been really, it's got to be really encouraging to see the responses you've gotten at all levels.
Yeah, absolutely. See, today, we're amazed of where we are today. And that is because of 2 reasons. One, the private sector, they saw that we have a solution for their needs. So they're really committed to what we're doing, to the point as a board of director, usually they meet every 3 months, sometimes every 6 months, Some board of directors, we meet on a monthly basis. And they are, a big organization, and they find the time to meet because they're seeing the impact that Mukatafa is bringing to their businesses. And they want to know what's happening, and they want to make sure that we're, in the right direction as agreed. So, and all the associations today are on every other month we meet. And we're trying to extend, make that 3 months, but they're so eager about it. The other thing that's actually amazing is how the public sector is interacting with us. They are not looking at us as a private company trying to, by the way, we don't work, we don't contract with the government. We only contract with the private sector. So we represent the private sector. So our bosses are the private sector, not the public. However, how the public sector became so open to us in sharing information, we reached a point that they pick up the phone and say, guys, we're thinking of developing a strategy, or we're thinking of developing a policy. We would like to engage the private sector. And that's what we do. And this is the achievement, actually. When we started, we were advocating for existing policies. So it's already issued. The impact is there, and we're trying to mitigate that impact or reduce it as much as possible. However, today, we are co-creating the policies or the strategy. And that makes a big difference, actually. Even the private sector now, they feel the ownership of that strategy or that policy, even if it doesn't meet their needs 100% or their wishes 100%. But they are engaged and they go and execute it. And however, we still have a long way to go. Not all ministries we're working with yet. Not all ministries are welcoming the idea of really embracing the private sector. They think they know better and they can do it by themselves. But that's one part, but it's a small, I would say, number of ministries. But on the other side, we reach a point where ministers saying, don't do this before you ask Mukatafa. Before we continue doing this, ask Mukatafa, because they know we have no interest and we have no conflict. We're independent, and we see who are the right audience, who are the right people to get information from. We do the research. And by the way, sometimes we, after we bring the two together, we have a different opinion, because we always have a responsibility in ourselves, because always in the room there is the government, there is the private sector, but the individuals are missing, or the consumer is missing. And we always want to make sure that their voice is heard as well. I'll tell you an example. We're doing a study on the e-commerce, the cross-border e-commerce. And Saudis are buying a lot of products from overseas. The local businesses are being impacted because of that. Products are coming from all over, but much cheaper, but they don't follow the local standards. They don't have, businesses, they don't employ, and they cannot compete. And we're looking into that, and we're doing a study, but we included 700 Saudi and 300 locals, expats living in Saudi, to understand their point of view. Are they with why they prefer to buy abroad, and to ensure that their position or their opinion is voiced. Actually, this would lead me to something that we're thinking of doing in the near future. See, not all policies are business related. There are so many policies that are impacting individuals. We aim to come to a point where we can do public consultation, meaning that there is a government policy that we need to include individuals on that policy. They have a say, they understand it, they know it before it comes, and we advocate for their need as well. So now we're starting with the businesses, then we're moving to individuals. So.
Yes, Prince Waleed, I'm surprised the PIF isn't calling, giving all your success to hoping to invest in Mukatafa. Prince Waleed bin Nasser Al-Saud, CEO of Mukatafa. So good to see you again. Thank you so much for your wonderful hospitality last week. Congratulations on all your success. Give our best to Al-Hanouf and Razan as well. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you both and hoping to see you soon back in Riyadh. Thank you very much.
That was our conversation with Prince Waleed bin Nasser Al-Saud. Again, listen to any of these individual conversations, all of our conversations, all these segments go on our YouTube page if you want to just listen to one or the other. But we thank Prince Waleed from the bottom of our hearts because that was a really good one. And we really appreciated his time. Just a really smart guy and lovely to talk to.
He's a capable guy, you can tell. And as I said in the piece, you know, one of the things I learned from a bad boss early on was if you need help, you ask the person that's busy because they're busy for a reason. And I think that's what happened with Prince Waleed. He's shown tremendous capacity and success in his area, and he just keeps being asked to do more and more and more, which is how Mukatafa was eventually formed. But what a fascinating discussion. What an interesting guy.
Yeah, he got sniffed out as a problem solver pretty quickly and then became very busy. So just a cool entrepreneurial success story, really interesting where the rubber meets the road on Vision 2030. So very cool. Richard, what do you think? Let's get to Yallah.
Saudi in a minute.
Yallah. It's still funny. 1 year on, 65 episodes. Hilarious.
65 episodes later. Number one, COP27. Conference of Parties 27. You know, we talk with people and they always say, don't say COP, which I don't usually say, but Conference of Parties, COP27 in Egypt is underway. And I added this because it's important. The conference officially runs from November 6th through November 18th. The meetings are being held at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. There are two main sites for the event, the Blue Zone and the Green Zone. The Blue Zone, based at the Sharm el-Sheikh International Convention Center, is where the official negotiations will be held. That space is managed by the United Nations and is subject to international law. Kind of interesting. More than 35,000 delegates are expected to attend the event, including President Biden and more than 100 heads of state. Although that is smaller than last year's summit in Glasgow, which brought together 120 world leaders and over 40,000 registered participants. It's a pretty good number for, I guess, a COP that, no major decisions are officially expected. I guess they do that every 2 years. So this is, a jump year.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big global spotlight on Egypt right now, Richard. Probably the most since 2013. There's a lot of sort of pressure there when the whole world gathers wherever they're gathering. There's a lot of, other stories that emerge. I really want to be optimistic about this summit. It's so hard, though, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a shaky global economy. There's all this pressure on climate action. It just seems like versus last year, and I know you mentioned this isn't like an action year, but all of the talk is now on climate finance, and with the sort of global economy in a bit of a recession or just not as sort of humming along as it used to be, it just seems, I just feel really not as optimistic about it this year. One report released ahead of the summit said that developing countries need to work with investors and rich companies to secure $1 trillion a year in external financing for climate action by the end of the decade. They're just, these numbers being thrown around are staggering, and it just feels like there's so much talk and not a lot of action. And I mean, I don't know if you want to react to that. It just
I hear you. The numbers are overwhelming, and I think, and I sort of wanted to put this down as a marker because, well, actually, one of the a later Yallah is the Saudi Green Initiative and the Middle East Green Initiative. And I think we'll revisit this, probably in a couple of weeks, either as a Yallah or one big thing, knowing me, because I kind of go off on some of these COP things. we won't know the outcome and the result for some time, and it'll be a lot of reporting, that sort of thing. But hopefully there'll be some good wrap ups. I thought it was interesting that there's 11 days there. The plan to be 11 days, and each has a thematic day. So like on the 9th, it was Finance Day, 10th, Science Day, 11th, Decarbonization Day, and so on and so forth. So, they're going through and they're trying to hit all the marks, but there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of disagreement on what reparations and what, aid it should be, should move from wealthier nations to poorer nations. And so anyway, we don't know how this will come out, and it's fraught. President Biden will be there shortly. He's coming off of some good policy that he passed in the U.S. in terms of climate action, but we'll see how he's received there. I think the tensions are pretty high between nations that are high emitters and those that are less so, but are trying to deal with some of the costs of climate change.
The way that I feel right now is that all the ice and the ice caps are going to melt, and we're still going to be talking about the cost of trying to deal with climate change. Richard, because you suggested this one, and I went back and listened to a little bit of our conversation with Jeffrey Beyer, was great and just really interesting to hear. He's based in Dubai, sort of the regional view of what was then the upcoming COP27, Saudi Green Initiative, Middle East Green Initiative, which we'll get to in a second. And I tried to sort of prep on this topic, and there is just so much out there, and it's just sort of like, okay, yeah, like I want this so much to succeed, for future generations.
And I agree with you. You get a sense of measures that aren't sufficient. John Kerry was just there talking about carbon credits and how to price them and make them universal and that sort of thing. And I mean, that's all nice and promising, but carbon credits have been abused, and they end up not achieving what you wanted so far. They've been disappointing in what their net effect has been. So you just wonder if there's going to be the impetus and the commitment to actually follow through on something that's meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think we should revisit this when it's over in a week or two.
Yeah.
And get the sort of like take a lay of the land, because it will next be in the UAE. Is that right? Or
yeah, and I guess that's supposed to be a consequential one. I mean, they're all consequential, but I mean, some decisions are taken. But yeah, UAE. So yeah, the Middle East is quite in the in the spotlight in terms of climate action globally.
Well, fingers crossed. It sounds like the big solution right now is to make one giant ice cube and just drop it in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and have everything cool down like water.
Well, that's not maybe that's on the agenda. That may be, I think that's day 8. Lucian's giant ice cube. Yeah, that's it. Thematic day.
Richard, Yallah number 2. Saudi Arabia announces visa-free entry ahead of the FIFA World Cup in Qatar 2022, which is coming up. For the first time ever, the Saudi Tourism Authority announced the extension of the Saudi multiple entry visa. The new announcement states that the multiple entry visa allows Haya cardholders, HAYYA cardholders, to stay in Saudi for up to 60 days with pre-entry to the Visa World Cup not required. Further extensions will allow for Haya with me, 1+3, and now allowing Haya card holders and 3 additional friends and family members to enter the kingdom. I spelled that out because it's not Haya like the so-called religious police. It's HAYYA. Right. This is interesting.
It is interesting. And this is, I think it's just notable that how far they've come. I mean, it's funny. It's also funny how sports sort of catalyzes this, because I don't know if you remember, the first easily accessed visitor visa that was introduced so people can attend the inaugural Diriyah E-Prix in 2018. What was that, 4 years ago? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden that came out. I said, "Oh, this is easy." And you remember the time too. That wasn't that long ago. If I wanted to travel to Saudi Arabia, I had to get a sponsor, and I had to request a multiple entry visa as opposed to this and that. Was it a business? Was it a travel? A different thing. It was a protracted process. We know. Mm-hmm. So so when you're talking about a Haya card holder saying, all right, I'm going to be in there for 60 days, and by the way, I want to, I want an allowance for others, who are with me and that sort of thing. Haya card holders and 3 additional friends and family members enter the kingdom. That's outrageous if you know anything about having to try to get into the kingdom over the last 25 years.
Yeah, if you tried to use your American Express with the NJAZIT system, which
right.
would not take a U.S. card, so you needed a Saudi credit card to use it. Yeah.
There's a wee bit of change, I think.
Yeah. And there's also just anecdotally, the change of actually entering is so much smoother. It's not just the actual process of entering, which is sort of like entering with global entry into the US. Once you have that visa, there's no really long line, or at least there hasn't been for me recently, but it's just quicker, and the people that are doing it are friendlier. They're no longer uniformed military officers or civilian. I mean, there's a totally different vibe to it. And it is one of the biggest changes, biggest practical changes that I can think of in Saudi Arabia recently, because it's just so consumer facing, and it's you're welcoming. But yeah, Richard, I'm so glad you mentioned the previous visa process. You and I spent a lot of time on that many times. Crazy stuff.
Back in the day, you'd roll in and there'd be processing for Saudi residents, GCC residents. And God forbid, the worst thing is if you rolled in and you were behind, you happened to be behind a flight of foreign laborers that showed up and were being processed. And, it could take you, if you didn't have somebody waiting for you, or if you didn't have, it could take you 3 hours to get through customs, just that first part. This is before you even get to, where they inspect your bags. And it was protracted. It was uncertain. It often wasn't very friendly. It's a whole different deal.
Yeah. And now if you don't have global entry coming into the US, if you don't time it out right, it's like it used to be in Saudi in 2014. It's a really, really long wait. And a Saudi friend just recently last week texted me. He said he just came back and was like, yeah, I don't obviously have global entry because I'm not an American. And it took 2 hours to get through that line. And it just, so yeah, that's huge progress. Richard, number 3, Yallah number 3.
Yes, number 3. Sorry. This is mine, right? Yeah. So yes. We referenced this earlier. Yeah. Saudi Arabia launches its own EV brand. The Kingdom's Sovereign Wealth Fund announced last week it is launching an electrical vehicle brand together with Taiwan's Foxconn called Seer. It will become the first Saudi automotive brand to produce electric vehicles in Saudi Arabia, and will design, manufacture, and sell a range of vehicles for consumers in the country and the MENA, Middle East, and North Africa region, including sedans and sport utility vehicles.
So this is really interesting. I'm glad this has its own thing. We were tempted to really get into it earlier, Richard. I like this idea in principle. Seer joins Lucid to be the sort of second car that's planned to be manufactured in Saudi Arabia. These are Seer's cars. And again, I hope they're saying it right. Seer is sort of for the regional market. They're not really meant to be exported globally, but so therefore they're probably the sort of mid-range, or, if Lucid is the luxury electric vehicle being produced in Saudi, then these Seer cars may be sort of in the middle range, sort of like for the people, I guess. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Well, Foxconn in general has been pushing into EV, and they just acquired the Lordstown, Ohio EV plant, and and essentially what they want to do is they're saying we have the areas of infotainment, connectivity, autonomous driving technologies, and they'll probably team up with BMW chassis and that sort of thing. That's the plan, as far as I understand. And they're basically coming in and saying, who wants to do this with us? We don't necessarily need to have a brand, although they do have a couple of models. But, we want to come in and be part of a manufacturing process where we're part of this in tandem with other partners. And so like I said, they just teamed up with the Lordstown, Ohio EV plant. This is the second one, which is just terrific. I mean, the Crown Prince, when he announced this, and this was just recently announced, he said, Saudi Arabia is not just building a new automotive brand. We are igniting a new industry and an ecosystem that attracts international and local investments, creates jobs opportunities for local talent, enables the private sector, and contributes to increasing Saudi Arabia's GDP over the next decade. They estimate this deal it will attract over $150 million in investment, foreign direct investment, create 30,000 direct and indirect jobs, and contribute $8 billion to Saudi Arabia's GDP by 2034. Point being is this is really impressive, because between Lucid and now this Sear project, they're going very heavy into EVs, and they're really what they've always wanted to do is build an automobile industry ecosystem, and they're doing that.
Yeah, and in the EV space too, which is interesting. Richard, you and I both remember that when they announced the Gazelle, which was kind of like they really wanted to make a car, and it actually looked like the FJ Cruiser, the Toyota, but it was sort of an SUV, obviously not EV.
Just to that point, that was really just a brainchild of a bunch of, I think, engineers over at King Saud University. It was never ever going to happen, but they did have Toyota and Nissan come in and say, look, can we, what about this? You want to come in and build a manufacturing plant? They both said no, not really. It's not compelling enough a business model for us. Although I think Nissan builds trucks. I think it's Nissan, but anyway. That's the amazing thing is Foxconn. I mean, this is a tremendously important company that's trying to move into a new sector and brings with it the extraordinary logistical and manufacturing and capabilities, and has chosen to do it in Saudi Arabia. And that's really going to jumpstart that sector for the kingdom.
Yeah, that's the ambition. Anyway, I can see this being the type of thing where there's a ton of money going into it. And right now it sounds like a really good idea, because they do have Lucid, and then they'll have this manufacturing cars and getting them to be compelling, and then creating a market for them. Those are all very difficult things to do. So the ambition, it's like Vision 2030. It's how right at the announce, it's like, well, it's a lot. It's going to be expensive, and it's going to take some time. And it's hard to see, because Lucid just missed their earnings, not by much, but they have a lot of a way to go to catch up to Tesla. And then you have all these other competitors from around the world that were just legacy cars being, converted into EVs all around the world. So I think that this is a great vision and a great idea. The implementation is going to be very interesting to watch if they don't have any legacy manufacturing in the kingdom now. I mean, they'll have it with Lucid again, but was there any announcement on where they will be manufacturing? Will it be alongside of Lucid?
No, I think it's on the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
But, they're talking about their first vehicle in 2025. And I agree with you. The EVs in general right now have stumbled a little bit, and Tesla itself. I mean, they've had at least 2 major recalls already this year. Tesla's a mess in many ways. And you're right. Lucid has missed their mark in terms of numbers this year, and they've lost some value. But as with everything, I think this is a very conscious and purposeful loss leader for Saudi Arabia. I'm sure they gave some tremendous incentives to Lucid to come there. I'm sure they gave some significant incentives to Foxconn to come there, all for the larger purpose of building this ecosystem.
Yeah, and the market size. I mean, if the whole world's going to go to EVs, then the market size is so big. There's plenty of space for Lucid and Sear and Tesla and all these other, because they'll all be replacing combustion engines.
Well, and exactly. And I think there's reliability issues that come along. If I were a Tesla owner, there's constantly problems with Teslas. If I'm going to spend that kind of money on a car, I'd kind of like to have one that isn't constantly having to go back, to the dealer to get something fixed.
You also might want a CEO that isn't selling Tesla stock. to finance the acquisition of Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah. If I'd much rather have Peter Rawlinson running my company than Elon Musk, if we're talking about an EV. Peter Rawlinson of Lucid, but that's just me. And the proof will be, we don't know if Lucid's going to make it, but they seem to be paying more attention to detail than Tesla is, and they certainly seem to be have their eye on the ball. But in any case, from Saudi Arabia's perspective, the ability in the last 2 years to attract Lucid, major EV makers, Lucid and Foxconn, which has a tremendous pedigree in terms of logistics and manufacturing, and now has aspirations in EV. The ability to attract them, however you did it, throwing a bunch of money at them, doesn't change the fact that they're there now, and what they're going to be doing fits perfectly in terms of their Vision 2030 priorities.
Yeah. Great point. I just last little thing on this. At the FII, inside the FII compound, they only had electric vehicles. So electric golf carts, and then there were a bunch of Lucids going back and forth, sort of like as a statement, like, hey, it's this classic kind of PR thing. But it was really interesting because there were a ton of Lucids, and I'd never seen one, and they're so cool. And so if they can just get those manufactured, they can get the demand going. They look so awesome.
That may be why they're missing their mark. All the Lucids are in the wild are in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, they're not reaching the market that they need to reach. And Richard, I don't see one parked. No, they haven't delivered mine yet.
I haven't gotten a notice that ours is delayed either.
You get the email saying your Lucid has arrived. You're like, oh, there it is, white, nice. Yallah number 4. Saudi Arabia is hosting the 22nd Arab Radio and TV Festival, running from the 9th through the 12th of November, so ongoing right now. 30 other countries will be participating in the event, including 12 that are non-Arab countries. Over 1,000 media experts and professionals from around 200 radio and TV networks and production and distribution companies will be attending. 2022's edition of the Arab Radio and Television Festival is being held in Saudi Arabia for the first time, as opposed to its usual location in Tunisia, where its headquarters are based, and will coincide with the establishment of the Future of Media exhibition. Richard, we aren't there because we're doing the 966, but we should be keynote speakers, I think.
Clearly. This was added just because I think it's interesting, and doesn't it seem to you that if you're going to convene anything now in the MENA region, it's going to be in Riyadh or Saudi Arabia?
Riyadh or Dubai, yeah, but
exactly. That's right. And I mean, it's really becoming a convening center of the region, and this is not obviously this is the Arab Radio and TV Festival. I mean, it's not a discussion of free speech or this sort of thing. I think, for example, that future of media exhibition is really focusing on production technologies and broadcasting, development of TV and radio performance, that sort of thing. But I just thought it was interesting. Yet another interesting association convening in Riyadh.
Yeah, very interesting. It doesn't say where this is being held in Riyadh. But Richard, we featured an article on our website, suscg.com, about NBC, which is NBC, having relocated to Riyadh recently, is now considering an IPO, which is interesting. They're a behemoth TV network in Saudi.
Yeah. Middle East Broadcasting Corporation, a Saudi company that was based in first in London and then in Dubai, and now it's back in Riyadh and brand new headquarters. It was important for them to come home, because I think that's if you're insisting that people have their regional headquarters in Riyadh, for goodness sake, your largest media company needs to be there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. So is this looks like this is going to sort of change to well, I guess it's still going to have it's going to be the 23rd next year, but there'll be the Future of Media exhibition is going to be going forward at this time. Is that they're sort of rebranding it, or is that?
I don't know if it's a one-off, as part of the festival, the convening of the Arab Radio and TV Festival. So it's hard to know if it's a one-off.
Cool.
Yallah number 5. Saudi Arabia commits $2.5 billion to Middle East Green Initiative over next 10 years. Saudi Arabia will contribute 2.5 billion to a green initiative in the Middle East over the next 10 years. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced at the COP27 UN Climate Summit. Prince Mohammed was speaking at the second edition of the Middle East Green Initiative conference being held in Cairo alongside the COP27 Climate Change Summit. He told attendees that the kingdom aims to provide more sustainable energy systems and that Saudi Arabia would build a prominent headquarters for the initiative. Quote, with concerted regional efforts, the initiative seeks to support efforts in cooperation in the region to reduce and eliminate emissions by more than 670 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, unquote, he said.
Yeah, very, ambitious and also laudable. All of this includes other initiatives as well, planting 50 billion trees, a lot of trees, cover the area of tree coverage 12 times, 50 billion. Reclamation of 200 million hectares of degraded land is another thing that I've seen a lot of. Right. This is also, he also made the announcement, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, that they would be, the PIF would go net zero by 2050, which made some headlines as well. That's pretty impressive, and it's very ambitious as well. We talked a little bit about this, Richard. This is, Saudi Arabia is taking this very seriously, and they are, because it's getting hotter, especially in their part of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is everybody's, asking people to tally up and pony up and say, what are you going to actually commit to? So it's interesting that, so in March last year, March 2021, Saudi Arabia announced the Middle East Green Initiative. And then April, they announced the Saudi Green Initiative. And they said between the two initiatives, the goal was 10.4 billion, cost commitment. And Saudi Arabia planned on contributing 15%, which at that time was 1.5 billion. It's interesting, this 2.5 billion they just committed ups the ante. Of course, it's over 10 years, but that was the plan, 10 years. So, and it's also, they're absolutely talking about mitigating emissions and that sort of thing. But a lot of what they're talking about is truly it's the green initiatives, planting that 50 billion trees is extraordinary, reclaiming degraded land, along with cutting emissions from hydrocarbon production by more than 60%. So, but that reforestation program is a big part of it. And it's extraordinarily ambitious when you say 50 billion, but, again, so this is nice. The SGI, Saudi Green Initiative, announced last April 2021. Middle East Green Initiative, March 2021. It's sort of renewing that and updating it and saying we're still all in on this, which is encouraging. And so they had meetings for the Middle East Initiative and the Saudi Initiative. As a matter of fact, the Middle East Initiative, I think, starts today. Mm-hmm. Middle East Green Initiative Summit, second. I'm sorry, they just had that, and the Saudi Green Initiative Forum starts on the 11th and will be the 11th and 12th. So they're trying to keep pushing the ball forward and keep it alive and I guess maintain commitments, if not increase commitments.
Richard, whoever is doing the actual tree planting, like whoever is in charge of that, let's try to track down for an interview with the 966. I sort of want to learn about how you get 50 billion trees into the ground. I'm sure there's some heavy machinery involved, but either way, I think that'd be a really awesome conversation.
That would be interesting.
And sort of learning about the different trees they are planting in the environment there, because they can't need a lot of water. So I'm going to put a little note here to try to track whoever that is down. That's a tough job.
The original number was 10 billion. Now they're adding 40 billion trees, the largest reforestation program in the world and twice the size of the Great Green Wall in the Sahel.
That's cool. That's really cool. I want to learn more about that. That sounds awesome. If successful, would make it an amazing documentary as well. They've got a little time to get it together.
If you're doing 50 billion trees, you have no time for the 966.
No, but you might squeeze out 30 to 40 minutes to talk to us about a few of the
on
different
site somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Planting trees.
Richard, Yallah number 6. Saudi Arabia's October PMI marks the highest growth rate since January 2021. The headline seasonally adjusted Purchasing Managers Index of Saudi Arabia rose 57.2, rose, to 57.2 in October from 56.6 last September, marking the strongest business outlook since January 2021. The PMI highlighted solid business conditions in the non-oil private sector economy during October 2022, according to Riyadh Bank's data. Firms witnessed enhanced domestic economic conditions and smooth inflationary pressures, which resulted in the most promising outlook for future output since the beginning of 2021.
I wouldn't add much to that. I guess one of the things that they mentioned in this report was that suppliers' delivery times continued to decline. So I guess they're getting some of their, supply and logistics that have bedeviled the whole globe. They're feeling like those inefficiencies are getting worked out. I mean, this is more of the same with Saudi Arabia in this current period, which is just keep on keeping on in terms of good news, in terms of the economy. But I think everyone's anticipating, and you look at everyone's anticipating. That's what happened with the OPEC Plus decision in October 5. They're all anticipating that there's gonna be a slowdown, and could be significant. But in the interim, until then, Saudi economy is just pumping along, doing. They've got to be pleased.
Got to be pleased. They're trying to keep it up. Richard, you noticed there was a new announcement on the supply chain resilience initiative. There's some, I don't have the name in front of me, but there's some new initiative for the Saudi supply chain announced around FII.
Yes. Yeah. It's got a big acronym.
Yeah.
Something.
It does. But